For one couple, their story began in a small apartment they had called home for many years. It was familiar and full of memories, but over time, the space began to feel tighter, and their aspirations started to outgrow the walls around them. They realized that what they truly wanted was a home that reflected both their growth and their hopes. Every weekend became an opportunity to explore. Instead of seeing the search as a burden, they treated it as a shared adventure. Together, they would set out to visit neighborhoods, walking through hallways filled with possibility. Some homes were too small, some didn't feel right, and others sparked a bit of excitement, only to be set aside after a second look. But the couple didn't let discouragement take root. What stood out most wasn't how quickly they would find the right place, but how patient and thoughtful they were throughout the process. Guiding them on this journey was a real estate consultant who quickly became more than just a professional resource. This person listened carefully to their hopes, asked questions that helped them clarify what they truly wanted, and gently pointed out details they might have overlooked. With each visit, the consultant helped them imagine how different spaces could support their daily life, not just in terms of size or price, but in how each home could nurture their well-being and reflect their values. At first glance, house hunting might seem purely practical, comparing square footage, looking at layouts, calculating budgets. But for this couple, the experience carried something deeper. They were learning to see themselves in new ways. What mattered most, what they were willing to compromise on, and what dreams they refused to let go of. Every choice became less about the building itself and more about who they wanted to be as a family. There were moments of uncertainty. Sometimes they wondered if their dream house was out of reach, or if they were being unrealistic. Yet instead of frustration, they turned those doubts into reflection. Each discussion after a tour became a chance to strengthen their bond and exercise in listening, negotiating, and understanding each other's perspectives. One might notice the sunlight pouring into a living room, while the other paid attention to whether the kitchen invited warmth for gatherings. These details, though small, became symbolic of how they valued life together. This first stage of their journey reveals something important. Searching for a home isn't only about finding a place to live, but also about learning patience, practicing gratitude, and building resilience. The process itself can be just as meaningful as the outcome, because it teaches us to slow down, to observe carefully, and to celebrate progress rather than rushing toward a finish line. And as this couple continued their search weekend after weekend, they weren't just walking through open houses. They were walking toward a future they had been quietly preparing for, step by step, through years of saving, planning, and dreaming. With each door they opened, they weren't simply checking another auction off the list. They were opening themselves to possibility, to growth, and to the hope that one day soon, the right home would open its doors to them. For this couple, each weekend carried that spark of anticipation. They would wake up early, plan their route, and set out with a mixture of curiosity and hope. The city felt alive in a new way, because every neighborhood, every street, became a canvas for imagining the life they could build. The consultant, always patient and insightful, guided them with care. Rather than rushing them to make decisions, the consultant encouraged them to notice the little things. Some visits sparked laughter. They would walk into a kitchen that felt too tiny and joke about how they'd barely fit a coffee pot inside. Other times, they marveled at architectural details, a curved staircase, a hidden reading nook, or a balcony that overlooked the city skyline. Even when a property wasn't the right fit, they left each tour with stories to tell, weaving their experiences into memories that already felt precious. The excitement wasn't only about the homes themselves, it was about the couple discovering new parts of themselves. Together, they began to refine their vision, aligning their priorities in a way that reflected both individuality and shared values. It's in these moments of exploration that house hunting transforms into something more profound. It becomes a mirror, showing us what we cherish most in life. For this couple, every new door opened was also a door to self-discovery. They began to see that their journey wasn't only about square footage or price tags. It was about creating a foundation for their future, a place where they could continue to grow, celebrate milestones, and find comfort in the everyday. With each new viewing, excitement built upon itself. The couple began to picture family dinners in bright kitchens, cozy evenings curled up on soft couches, and mornings filled with sunlight streaming through windows. These visions weren't abstract fantasies, they were guiding lights, helping them recognize when a house had the potential to be more than just walls and a roof. And so, their weekends became chapters in a story filled with curiosity, hope, and the growing conviction that something special was within reach. The joy wasn't only in the destination, but in the very act of searching, walking through hallways, climbing staircases, and imagining a life not yet lived. Even in the most uplifting journeys, moments of uncertainty arise, times when patience feels tested and hope begins to waver. For the couple searching for a home, excitement slowly turned into unexpected challenges. Some houses looked ideal in photos, but felt disappointing in person. Others stretched beyond budget or lacked the sense of community they desired. At times, they came home tired, questioning if they aimed too high. Yet their consultant reminded them, every step, even the wrong ones, was part of the path. A house that wasn't right was still a lesson leading them closer to what they truly wanted. Then came the moment they had been waiting for. After countless weekends of searching, walking through doors that opened to possibility, but not yet belonging, they finally stepped into a house that felt different. From the very first glance, it wasn't only the architecture or the layout that caught their attention. It was the feeling. The rooms seemed to welcome them. The light filled the space in just the right way, and the neighborhood carried the sense of community they had quietly longed for. They looked at each other, and without needing to say much, they knew this was it. The house wasn't perfect by every standard, but it was perfect for them. Every effort, every patient step had led them here. It was proof that persistence and patience do pay off, even when the journey feels long. Moving in was filled with joy. Boxes of memories slowly found new places, and the once empty rooms began to echo with laughter, shared meals, and the comfort of routine. Every corner became a reminder of both what they had gained and what they had overcome. Wanting to share their happiness, they organized a small housewarming party. It wasn't grand, but warm and heartfelt. Friends, family, and their real estate consultant, the one who guided them through challenges, gathered to celebrate. It was more than a new address. It was a celebration of resilience, gratitude, and community. Through this, the couple realized gratitude was the true foundation of their home. Their journey taught them that fulfillment isn't about rushing, but trusting the process, learning from setbacks, and appreciating growth along the way. Their home became more than a building. It was a reflection of values, patience, perseverance, and gratitude. Standing together in their living room, surrounded by laughter, they understood the real reward wasn't just the house, but the lessons and joy of reaching this moment. Their story reminds us, every meaningful dream takes time. Stay patient, stay grateful, and treasure the journey as much as the destination.